President Trump is talking about cracking down on crime. The Democrats don't have much of a response, and a whole lot of other things at a televised cabinet meeting that lasted more than 3 hours. The crime crackdown here in Washington has led Trump to declare his unlimited authority.
I would have the right to do anything I want to do. I'm the president of the United States. If I think our country's in danger, and it is in danger in these cities, I can do it.
The president had been planning to send National Guard troops to Chicago and is annoyed that Governor J.B. Pritzker hasn't demanded them, and Mayor Brandon Johnson is pushing back.
So the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator. But I'm not a dictator. I just know how to stop crime. And you would think that Illinois would have such a problem with crime, such a bad governor. He should be calling me.
A military occupation of the city of Chicago would not only be illegal, but unconstitutional and costly. The city of Chicago is not requesting that federal troops come and occupy our city.
But Trump keeps circling back to his get tough policies here in the District of Columbia, where he has the most power because of limited home rule.
Capital punishment. If somebody kills somebody in the Capitol, Washington, D.C., we're going to be seeking the death penalty. And that's a very strong preventative.
Now, the president did raise some other topics during the marathon presser.
And windmills, we're just not going to allow them. They're ruining our country.
Windmills. He kept returning to the argument that he's made D.C. safer.
There are other reporters and journalists, good people, and you don't have to say it, but that have also been attacked violently. And not violently, too, pretty badly. But, and I bet you see a big difference in the streets right now.
And the Democrats' response, that this is a manufactured issue, that the crime figures are dropping, that it's racially motivated, essentially arguing there isn't much of a crime problem. But the bottom line is fear, and people here are scared in a city that could not stop an endless wave of carjackings until the Fed showed up. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. The media are deeply divided, with some commentators defending the president on crime.
5 years ago, reporters were calling the president an insurrectionist. But now they're just grateful they're not getting pistol whipped.
More people are killed in Chicago than anywhere else in the state, the country. And by the way, murders may be down, but they're still unacceptable.
The Democrats, man, Trump has their backs up against the wall, doesn't he? Now, all they know is failure. All their policies have failed.
Others are challenging his motives and his results.
This isn't the way to fix the problem of actual crime. This has everything to do with intimidation and Donald Trump's desire for martial law.
Donald Trump is attacking cities with large black and brown populations, with a lot of immigrants, and with black mayors. All three, D.C., Chicago, and Los Angeles. I do not think that that is by accident.
What the president is saying is he wants to have law enforcement with long guns in these neighborhoods to put fear in the minds of those residents in communities that are largely led by black mayors.
Joining us now here in Washington, Guy Benson of townhall.com, host of the Guy Benson Radio Show, and Lucy Caldwell, a board member at Renew Democracy. Guy, the day after the Trump press conference, an insane transgender gunman killed 2 children and wounded 17 others at a Catholic school where they were praying. It is shocking. It is heartbreaking. It is hard for me to talk about. So crime is not a manufactured issue.
Oh, of course not. I mean, not in Minneapolis, not in any of these major cities. And what's so interesting to me is playing that montage that we just did, people saying, oh, this is about striking fear into the hearts of residents of these cities because they're led by black leaders. I think that's delusional. I think the point here, especially in Washington, D.C., is to strike fear in the hearts of criminals, who've had the run of the place for a very long time, and that's changing. And I think a lot of the racially charged, I think really disgusting arguments that we heard there from a lot of these commentators completely undermined by the mayor of Washington, D.C., who this week came out and had to sort of grudgingly admit all the crime stats are way down. We hadn't had a murder for the better part of 2 weeks in the district, which was unheard of for a long time.
Right.
And she basically thanked the federal presence.
She did.
So I mean, that
Mayor-
makes
Mayor-
Bowser. Yeah,
Mayor
it makes it a
Muriel
lot
Bowser,
harder.
yes.
A black female making that argument. So is that a racist argument now or not?
Lucy, we've been through so many of these school shootings, going back to Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Parkland High School, Uvalde, and the devastating effect they have on a community. And now, because there's been so many of them, it's a big story for a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously terrible. And you can actually even see how even some conservative commentators, including on this network this week, have started to say this is really a problem when we have to contend with the fact that young white men are disproportionately committing these school shootings. Trey Gowdy was saying that right after this happened. I do want to say, I think that on the DC front, I think that the racially charged language is certainly really, really unhelpful. And we saw that elsewhere. Hakeem Jeffries giving a statement about Trump targeting the Fed chair of the Fed board member by saying it's because she's a black woman, right? Yeah. Instead of simply saying this is politicized, and it would be politicized regardless of someone's race and gender. But I think that two things can be true. It can both be the case that Democrats and center-left commentators once again are completely missing the mark on how they talk about this issue, and that Trump has an idea of being the big lawman and waging these threats about I'm coming to your city next that is equally unhelpful.
But when Trump says people would rather have a dictator who gets crime down, and he was being a little tongue-in-cheek, but does he have a point?
I mean, in some cases, it's not a case for dictatorship, and he then immediately said, I'm not a dictator.
Yeah.
Here's the thing I'd push back just slightly on what you said, because we saw also intriguingly this week, not just comments from Mayor Bowser here in D.C., but movement from the governor of California, who has spent the better part of 2 or 3 weeks making this big show about how he's the biggest Democratic name, resisting Donald Trump and making fun of him and all these things. Trolling him aggressively to get attention, so he's gotten that attention.
Yeah.
But he came out and put together this task force, and he's saying we're going to have these squads that come in to fight crime. He's doing that not because he's bowing to Trump, but because there are clearly crime problems in some of these places. And so I think between Bowser and Newsom, there's an acknowledgement that it's not a completely fabricated thing that Donald Trump has come in here inventing for power purposes. He's speaking to real concerns that people have who live there.
But there are crime problems in a lot of places. And we can, again, two things can be true. We can hold in our mind that crime is a problem many places, and that it is also a problem in some red states and in some communities in red cities. So just this week,
Sure,
Jake
but
Tapper,
why-
go ahead.
But why the Democrats don't seem to have much of a response? Oh, the numbers are down. Well, you don't care about the statistics if you're the one being held up at gunpoint. Why do they seem to be arguing against the fact that there's a crime crisis?
Well, I don't think that they are arguing against the fact that there's a crime crisis. I think that what you hear actually from people like Mayor Bowser in her earlier comments in August is that the kind of support that they would like to see provided by federal law enforcement agents is not one where National Guard members in military gear come in and sweep through the streets of Washington. Whether or not you agree with that, disagree with that, that is a separate issue than whether or not they're acknowledging that crime is an issue. She was very clear. 2023 was a terrible year for carjacking. It's actually people like Speaker Johnson, when he was confronted by Jake Tapper about crime in his own home state, was kind of like, oh my God, nothing to see here. Don't worry about that. So if we're going to have a conversation about crime, let's have a whole cloth argument conversation about crime everywhere.
Yeah, and a lot of red states do have a crime problem, specifically located, for the most part, in blue cities led by Democrats. That's part of the trolling Newsom was doing. Look at this city.
The president was all
by?
set, it seemed, to send the National Guard to Chicago, where numbers are appallingly high, 621 homicides last year. But now he seems to want an invitation first. And late last night, he posted that the governor, J.B. Pritzker, is crazy and pathetic. Straighten it out or we're coming. But before, he just seemed to be ready to come.
So I guess that's an opportunity for the governor of Illinois to actually do something and exert some leadership here, perhaps the mayor of Chicago as well. The problem that we see in a place like Chicago, from Mayor Johnson, for example, is he can go on, and we played the clip of him on another network saying, oh, well, this would be a military occupation, it's illegal, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm open to arguments about presidential authority in a city that is not a federal district, right? I think those are fair questions to ask.
Yeah.
But he gives the game away, Brandon Johnson does, when in a separate interview on that same network, on their morning show, he was asked four or five times in a row, and
Yes.
credit to Joe Scarborough for drilling down on it. Do you think more local cops walking the beat would help the crime situation? And Johnson would not say yes, because he doesn't actually believe it. So he can hide behind some of the, federal authority arguments when he's out there trying to oppose Donald Trump, but at his core, he is anti-law enforcement, which I think underscores a lot of the problem that we see in a place like Chicago under his leadership.
Lucy, when I drive around, whether it's Capitol Hill or downtown or in the northwest part of the city, I'm not seeing National Guard troops and agents. And I wonder if that's because they're mostly stationed in sort of high-profile tourist areas, as opposed to people may have the sense that they're constantly patrolling the streets. But nevertheless, it's obviously scared some of the criminals into, at least for now, lying low.
Well, I see them all over the place. I see them, but I live in DC Northwest, like in the center, close to downtown. So I see them a lot. And one of the things that has also happened is that foot traffic is also down. And we don't have clear data because it's only been a couple of weeks, but it seems like other things that would be anecdata, restaurant reservations, whatever. I was in an Uber the other day, and my Uber driver, who, by the way, was an Afghanistan translator who came over to this country for a new life, told me that normally he makes about $1,000 a week driving Uber. In the last 2 weeks, it's down to $300 or $400 a week. So yes, that is just an anecdote. Plural of anecdote is not data. But obviously, there are many fewer people out and about in D.C. There are people I have seen with my own eyes, ICE raids happening with assistance of federal law enforcement on U Street, in Adams Morgan, in DuPont. So yeah. I think a lot of people are seeing them out and about. And we have to think about the continuum between security and then people going about their daily lives. There are always trade-offs.
I've got half a minute. Is it too quick for the president to declare mission accomplished?
Well, I think the question is, what's the long game? Because what we see in D.C., I don't have a problem with it at all. I think it's proving that a heavy presence can really cut down on crime. But is it sustainable? And what comes next? So at some point, he probably does want to declare victory and say, look, this worked. Here's the football again over to you. Don't screw it up. I don't know what the next move is for him.
Meanwhile, a reporter for the Epoch Times, Iris Tao, came to that long press conference and talked about how she had been pistol whipped, which I agree, I'm sympathetic, certainly. But she was there to support the man she's covering in the White House. And so that...
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.